Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Once again, it just wouldn't be a podcast without a few disasters happening. I was right in the middle of recording this show. In fact, I was about halfway through when one of my cats knocked something over, causing an enormous sound. I mean, this was like a gunshot practically going off. So I thought, well, I'll just edit out that one little bit. And in the process, I somehow managed to delete the show. So here we go again. I hate doing things twice. Well, unless it's something fun like eating pizza or drinking coffee. Anyway, mysteries from the past. I have heard the following story maybe a dozen times from different sources. I have a huge collection of books that someday I need to reorganize and place in some sort of order. I have paranormal mixed in with history. I have so many things stuck on the shelves that are not books. I have no room left for newer volumes, so they're shoved sideways on top of other books. I even have books piled up on the floor in front of the bookshelves. It's kind of a mess, kind of a huge mess. The story of this mystery ship has fascinated me for a long time, but I never got around to putting it in a show until now. As always, the mysteries involving bizarre activity is layered into mixed up details that only make getting to the truth near impossible. I'll try to get all my facts straight and hopefully make some sense out of this story. In 1947, the Dutch freighter SS Ourang Medan sent a cryptic Morse code message involving an SOS along with some details. The word orang is Malay or Indonesian for man or person. Medan is the largest city on the Indonesian island of Sumatra. Ourang Medan would translate as Man of Medan. Even though it was a Dutch ship, it would have an odd name like this. For example, the California, the ship that was involved in the Titanic sinking, was not owned by the United States. It was owned by England. They just named it the California. The emergency message said, all officers, including the captain, are dead, laying in chart room and bridge. Possibly the whole crew dead. The person sending the Morse code began hitting the keys at random, making no sense to the folks picking it up. The last thing sent was, I die. The radio went dead after that. The transmission had been long enough for a ship with a directional location equipment to locate its position. The Silver Star sent out a response even though the last message sounded final. Just in case. They were en route and would arrive in about 19 hours. They also broadcast the location of the Ourang Medan in case some other ship was closer. It is policy anytime a distress call is received at sea, everyone stops what they're doing and they go to their aid. The idea is you go to help because someday it might be you asking for rescue. After sailing in the direction of the last transmission, the Silver Star arrived in the general location and began scanning the horizon for the Ourang Medan. The ship in trouble had been drifting about 50 miles from its transmission point over the 19-hour period. Once the ship was spotted, the Silver Star pulled alongside and tried to hail anyone on board. Sailors used the call ahoy because it's a bit drawn out and it's easy to yell. It's far better than yelling, "Hey you." The word has been used for hundreds of years and nobody is quite sure when or where it came from. The captain and officers scanned the decks looking for any of the crew. The ship looked in good shape and there was no sign of any damage. It is highly dangerous to pull two ships close together. If they slam together, one or both might wind up at the bottom. Also, nobody knew what might be going on board the ship. The Silver Star sent a boarding crew over by motor launch. One of the sailors had to climb a rope up to the deck and then lower the gangway so the rest of the party could come up. As the boarding party assembled on deck, they said they all felt a chill run through them. They tried to write this off as being nerves. Once they were ready, or at least as ready as they're going to get, the boarding party began their search. There were bodies laying around on the deck. These were obviously dead. It was well over 100 degrees and the heat was causing the bodies to swell. A quick look showed the bodies of the crew were all wide-eyed with horror on their faces, twisted in terror, arms out as if trying to fight off some unseen and unknown thing. The ship's dog was found dead. It looked as if it were trying to fight something off. Its teeth were bared, and its body was in a fighting position. The radio was up on the same deck as the bridge, so that's where they went. All the ship's officers were found laying on the floor of the bridge and the rooms behind it. In the radio room, the operator was found laying across the desk, his hand still near the key. The search party was quickly losing hope of finding any living crew. They made their way down to the engine room, only to find the crew there also dead, with looks of fear or horror frozen in place. Once the ship had been searched, the total number of bodies found was 22. One of the lifeboats was missing, giving them hope that someone had escaped. A search would need to be started for the missing boat. Try as they might, they never found the ship's logbook. They theorized that whoever took the lifeboat must have taken the log with them. The party was assembled on the main deck near the gangway. They all felt that chill still in the air. Even with the temperature well above 100 degrees, they all felt cold. They all wanted to get back home as quickly as possible. Once back on their own ship, the captain wanted a report. The boarding party told what they had seen. Even with the temperature in excess of 100 degrees, members of the rescue party said that they all felt cold the entire time they were on the Ourang Medan. All the victims had suffered from something, but none had any visible injuries when examined. They also seemed to be decaying quicker than they should be. At the time, there were no body farms studying how bodies decompose under certain conditions. The war had been over for 2 years. Some of the boarding party knew what the dead looked like and how they looked after a day or two. The crew of the Ourang Medan looked as if they had been dead for 4 or 5, maybe even 6 days. The captain wanted to salvage the stricken ship. Authorities would want to investigate, find out what caused 22 men to die in such horrendous-looking conditions. There was also the salvage rights. The ship might bring in a few dollars. Orders were given to ready the Silver Star to take the abandoned ship in tow. They would sail for the closest port as soon as the two ships were attached to each other. The boarding party had to motor back over to the Ourang Medan and place a cable over the towing point. The men didn't want to be on board any longer than necessary. They clomb the gangway and went to work. One of the crewmen noticed smoke coming from one of the cargo holds. The smoke went from light to dark to black. It began boiling from the hatch. The boarding crew dropped what they were doing and they ran for the launch. They were back at the Silver Star, and the entire crew stood and watched as the Ourang Medan exploded. It looked as if it rose up from the water and then quickly sank below the waves. Soon there was nothing left except the bits and pieces of floating debris. The captain marked the location of the sinking and then radioed port to let them know what had become of the ship. What caused the crew to die under such bizarre conditions, along what was in the cargo hold that blew the ship up, was a mystery. But folks have lives to live, and the Silver Star still had a job to do, so the mystery was not looked into for some time. Looked. I'm making up words as I go. Try using that one next time you're talking to somebody. Lookin'. In June 1953, Volume 6, Number 6 issue of Fate magazine ran an article by Frank Edwards and Robert Hulse. The story was written saying, "Death at Sea." The two writers had looked into the reports of the Ourang Medan. They had become highly interested, and so they put together a story and they put it in Fate magazine. Author Morris K. Jessup quoted the article in his 1955 book, The Case for UFOs. In his book, he talked about the Philadelphia experiment and the Navy's reproduction of it. He speculated the crew of the Ourang Medan might have been attacked by UFOs or paranormal forces prior to their deaths. Evidence cited by Jessup and others included the apparent absence of any natural cause of death, the terrified expressions on the faces of the deceased, and how some of the dead were believed to be pointing towards some unknown enemy. Letters were found in 2003 using a Freedom of Information Act that were written by a C.H. Mark in December of 1959. He was not listed as being a CIA agent, but most folks working for the agency are not listed as being employed by them. They use what's called private contractors. The recipient of these letters was none other than Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA. Several of these letters referred to the Ourang Medan. They described when and where the Ourang Medan was found and what the boarding party found while they searched the ship. It would appear the CIA was interested in the mystery enough to have a private contractor look into it. Like a lot of FOIA requests, the letters were edited, taking out some names and information that is considered national security. This makes me wonder what secrets could a Dutch registered ship sailing in 1947 have that would somehow affect our national security in 1959 or in 2003 when the letters were requested. The letters from Mark also had a few details that were not mentioned in the original article. The letters said, June 27th, 1947, in the South Seas, the SS Ourang Medan sent an SOS call and asked at the same time that a doctor be sent. The combination of two emergency calls was considered very unusual. The emergency call was intercepted by both the steamer City of Baltimore and the American steamboat Silver Star. After the response of the Silver Star, the Ourang Medan gave in a renewed radio message their position at 179 degrees west and 20 degrees south. The location in the letter was about 3,000 miles different from what had been reported in the magazine. With such a wide difference in location, it makes me think that somebody didn't want anyone knowing where the ship had sunk in case a salvage operation was launched. During the radio call, the connection was broken off. The unknown radio operator once again managed to contact the Silver Star with "I die," and that was it. At the time of the SOS, the Silver Star was 200 nautical miles, or 230 land miles, southeast of the position reported by the Ourang Medan, a 19-hour trip that needed to be made before help could arrive. There's a very good reason that nautical miles are different from land miles. A land mile is a set distance, whereas a nautical mile will vary slightly in length depending on how close you are to the equator. This is all to do with the way the Earth is separated into degrees. And since the Earth is not perfectly round, by the time you get near the poles, the distance of a nautical mile is greater than the distance near the equator. The basic concept of the mile originated in Roman times. The Romans used a unit of distance called a mille passum, which translates into 1,000 paces. Each pace was considered to be about 5 Roman feet. A pace is measured from your left foot hitting the ground twice. I forgot what my pace count is. I had it written inside my patrol cap, but I've lost it along with the distance inside my mind. Lots of things vanish back in the dark recesses. A Roman mile was 5,000 feet. In 1592, Parliament set about determining the length of the mile, and they decided that each one should be made up of 8 furlongs, or the length of the furrow a team of oxen could plow in a day. Since a furlong is 660 feet, we end up with a 5,280-foot mile. Now you know why a mile is as long as it is, in case you were wondering. Back to those letters. As the Silver Star was sailing to where the stricken ship had sent their last transmission, they were staying in contact with the city of Baltimore, which had a doctor on board. Instead of the Ourang Medan being 50 miles from its reported location, it was a considerable distance farther. Like I said at the beginning, some of this information is mixed up by either mistaken records or falsified reports. Somebody didn't want this ship found. The next day, June 28, 1947, at around 9 o'clock local time, the Ourang Medan was sighted. The chimneys showed no smoke, and the steamer did not change its position. The flag was not set. The Silver Star circled the stricken vessel at a distance of several hundred feet and sounded the ship's horn several times, but there were no people visible on board the stricken vessel. The Ourang Medan had a slight list to starboard, but no visible damage. The starboard of a ship in ancient times was a rudder mounted on the right side of the boat. Any boat tying up to a pier would want to keep the rudder, or the starboard, away from being crushed, so port was always to the left side. I had to ask a guy that was in the Navy all these questions. The crew of the Silver Star suspected that the list was due to poorly loaded cargo or uneven coal consumption. As the steamer circled, the Silver Star noted that a lifeboat was missing on the starboard side. The lift for the missing boat, with lines still hung from the side of the damaged vessel, which made an absolutely seaworthy impression. Since calling with a megaphone did not cause a response, the Silver Star launched a boat with the first officer and 9 men to investigate the Ourang Medan. 4 men climbed over the rail and began to look at the ship. Due to the size of the steamer, the Americans estimated that a 40-man crew would have been on ship. On the upper deck, the men of the Silver Star found the first bodies. The crew members of the Ourang Medan appeared to have died in great agony, but showed no external injuries, no traces of blood or struggle. The ship's staff all seemed to be Asians. The letter said, sprawled on their backs, the frozen faces upturned to the sun, with mouths gaping open and eyes staring, the dead bodies resembled horrible caricatures. In the radio room, the radio operator who had made contact with them was also found dead. The hope of finding the steamer's log when searching the bridge and the captain's cabin did not materialize. All ship's papers seem to have been taken by the crew of the missing lifeboat. Early on, the 4 men of the Silver Star perceived a peculiar smell while on board. Suddenly, smoke was detected, suggesting there was a fire in the ship. The first officer immediately ordered everyone to leave the stricken vessel. When the crew returning had covered about half the distance to the Silver Star, there were several heavy explosions on board the Ourang Medan, which did not destroy the ship, but did set it on fire. For hours, the Silver Star watched the burning steamer, which finally lay on its side and sunk beneath the surface. The sea depth at this point is about 16,000 feet. The captain of the Silver Star had no explanation for the incident, but suspected that the Ourang Medan had loaded chemicals, ammunition, and/or explosives. He made a record of the incident in the logbook to report to the authorities on his return home. In these letters, they didn't mention anything about the boarding party finding the deck of the ship to be cold, but maybe they just left it out. July 12th, 1947. Some more information from those letters. 3 weeks later, a lifeboat was washed ashore on the island of Toingay, which is a part of the Marshall Islands. Of the 7 passengers, 6 had already died. The last surviving person was cared for by a missionary. This person said he was the 2nd officer of the Ourang Medan, named Jerry Rabbit. According to his information, the Ourang Medan had arrived in Ballast, Shanghai on June 7, 1947, where Rabbit was recruited. The ship's captain of the steamer, strangely enough, did not want to see any of Rabbit's paperwork. The now 2nd officer suspected that a large portion of the crew had been recruited in a similar manner. According to Rabbit's information, it was originally a Chinese steamer, which had possibly been used for cargo or as a transport for troops. In Shanghai, 7,000 boxes of unknown materials were taken on board at night. The ship sailed south on the morning of June 9, 1947. In a small harbor about 80 nautical miles south of Shanghai, another 8,000 boxes were taken on board. Rabbit suspected that the entire cargo was contraband. The destination of the Ourang Medan was Costa Rica, where the cargo was to be handed off to another vessel while still at sea. The course of the steamer was designed to avoid the usual shipping routes and led through the Marianas and the Carolinian Islands. After 10 days, probably around June 21st, 1947, the stokers began to fall ill. One of them died immediately. The stokers were the men who loaded coal into the boilers. The captain stated the cause of death was heat stroke. The second officer considered this unlikely, even though the boiler room was extremely hot. Stokers knew how to work under these conditions. A few days later, the entire machine crew began to fall ill and complained of severe stomach pain and cramps. Looking through the ship's papers, Rabbit discovered that the Ourang Medan had loaded 15,000 boxes of sulfuric acid and cyanide and 20 canisters of nitroglycerin. Rabbit guessed that some of the boxes had become leaky and the fumes had formed. Since the captain refused to make an emergency call and was now incapacitated, Rabbit took the logbook, and together with 6 crew members, they launched one of the lifeboats. As they were rowing away from the ship's engines stopped. Since the lifeboat was not adequately equipped with water or provisions, the 6 crewmen of the lifeboat died within a few days due to the intense heat. A second officer, Jerry Rabbit, died of exhaustion a few days after his rescue. In some of the other reports, the second officer was said to be from Germany. The name Jerry Rabbit might have been a pseudonym. In 1947 or 48, a German ship's officer might have wanted to travel undercover. The official story of the SS Ourang Medan, as reported in the Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council, May 9, 1952, is somewhat different from this original story or from what was found in the letters. The official report from 52 says, "Perhaps one of the most perturbing sea dramas occurred February 1948. Radio silence was broken with an urgent SOS from the SS Ourang Medan, a Dutch vessel then proceeding through the Straits of Malacca. The strange distress call transmitted in Morse code eerily read, 'SOS from Ourang Medan. We float. All officers, including the captain, dead in chart room and on the bridge. Probably the whole crew.' There are a few confused dots and dashes. Later 2 words come through clearly. They were, 'I die.' Then nothing more. Later, the Ourang Medan was found adrift approximately 50 miles from her indicated position. When the vessel, which had stumbled across her, sent a boat over to investigate, the sailors swarming on board the Ourang Medan found a sight seldom seen. There wasn't a living person or creature on board. There were dead men everywhere. The bodies were strewn about the decks, in the passageways, in the chart room, on the bridge, sprawled on their backs, the frozen faces upturned to the sun with mouths gaping open and eyes staring. The dead bodies resembled horrible caricatures. Even the ship's dog was found dead, yet the bodies seemed to bear no sign of injury or wounds. When a fire was discovered in number 4 hold, she had to be abandoned. A few minutes later, an explosion followed and the Ourang Medan sank. To this day, no explanation has been offered as to what might have happened to the unfortunate ship's company. To date, the dates and the locations are all different. Just because this is the official report doesn't mean it's the real story. Having just come out of World War II, a lot of news articles covered things related to the war. It was on everybody's mind. A ship from Holland sinking in the middle of nowhere with a crew most folks didn't know could have been written up with a lot of details mixed up and with other stories. The dates could have been wrong, as the story was told first at the port closest to where the ship went down, and then once the Silver Star arrived at its destination. There were a lot of news articles that might have been about this mystery ship. The San Francisco Examiner from October 1948 had a short story called The Secrets of the Sea. In it, the writer told about an abandoned ship being found that once boarded the crew was all found dead. As the boarding party went about searching the ship, it began to burn. The boarding party abandoned the ship and watched as it burned and then sank. The same short piece appeared in the Atlantic Constitution the same day. The story was then repeated in a few other newspapers. Over time, dates and locations were changed. The date could have been anywhere from 1946 up until 1958. A news report from Yorkshire Evening Post, printed in London, was found November 21st, 1940. The article was titled Mystery SOS from Dead Ship. Explosions were repeated. Soon nothing was left of the Ourang Medan but a blazing hulk. The next day the fire burned itself out and the steamer went under, her secret going down with her. The Ourang Medan had sent out an SOS, and the message was, "Send doctor, urgent. SOS from the steamship Ourang Medan. Beg ships with shortwave wireless get in touch with doctor." Other shortwave sets were used to relay the call for help, winding up at the medical station in Germany. Other folks listening in responded from Rome and France. They informed the Ourang Medan to send their medical questions and the staff would respond. The newspaper didn't go into any detail on what the medical emergency was or what became of the crew. The newspaper archives do get destroyed, though. World War II saw the destruction of tons of records that could have answered some huge questions. If you follow the Jack the Ripper story, retired British police detective Trevor Marriott was looking into the possibility that the murderer was a German merchant seaman. The same murders were reported in South America in port towns where German vessels had been docked. The records of who these sailors were had all been destroyed during bombings of German seaports. How many mysteries could have been solved if the old news articles and company records had survived? The Daily Mirror also sent out a newspaper article from London. The story was printed November 22nd, 1940, titled "Crew Dies in SOS Mystery." The story followed a lot of the basics of the Ourang Medan story. The Hampshire Telegraph from Hampshire, England, November 29, 1940, ran an article titled "Story of Weird Sea Tragedy." The weird SOS, the basic location, along with the crew being found dead and the ship exploding and sinking, were all pretty much the same. As I was researching the story, I came across an article that stated the SS Silver Star wasn't at sea during the early time frame mentioned. The article then said that the Silver Star was built in the 1940s. The writer was saying since the Silver Star wasn't sailing in the 40s, the entire story must have been manufactured, and the names were all just pretty much pulled from a hat. A little more research, and I found construction of the SS Silver Star was begun in 1936. It took nearly 5 years from laying the keel to sailing the high seas. The SS Silver Star could have been in service in 1940. The radio transmission location device was invented before war broke out, but there were no reasons for cargo ships to have such a device. In the earlier stories, the Ourang Medan had sent out their location during the SOS broadcast. The location where the ship sent the SOS, as well as the place it was found, are vastly different, depending on which article you read. Most say it was somewhere around the South Seas. Sometimes the ship was near the Marshall Islands, while other times it was reported around New Guinea. It may have even been near the Solomon Islands. The earliest news articles didn't mention the Silver Star or the city of Baltimore as being the rescue ships. A researcher contacted Lloyd's of London, the international ship insurer, to see if the Ourang Medan was listed in their records. A look showed no such ship was being insured any time between 1940 to 1950. This only made the search more confusing. Not every ship at sea is insured by Lloyd's of London. Some are willing to run the risk and sail uninsured. The possibility of the ship having been seized by pirates or other means who changed the name also came up. The second officer had said he thought the ship was originally from China. At the end of World War I, a treaty was signed by most of the countries of the world. The protocol for the prohibition of the use in war of asphyxiating, poisonous, or other gases and of bacteriological methods of warfare in international law, treaty signed in 1925 by most of the world's countries banning the use of chemical and biological weapons in war. It was drafted in 1925, the Geneva Conference, as part of a series of measures designed to avoid repetition of the atrocities committed by the belligerents in World War I. Japan had been an ally of the United States at the time. They signed the treaty, but then they didn't ratify it. During World War II, everyone was on pins and needles, expecting one side or the other to begin using gas or chemical weapons. Rules in combat only work if one side expects they're going to lose. If they're convinced they will win, and all the evidence supports their ideas, and then things start to get a little tight, breaking out gas weapons could be easily considered. A lot of people commit murder because they think they're smart enough to get away with it. If a country's convinced no one will ever be able to try them for their actions, they will have no reason to behave. Just look at Nazi Germany in the 30s and 40s. Shiro Ishii, a graduate of Kyoto Imperial University and a member of the Army Medical Corps, was reading about the recent ban when he got an idea. If biological weapons were so dangerous that they were off limits, then those must have been the best kind of weapons to have. When Japan invaded China in 1931, Ishii was allowed to build an experimental lab known as Unit 731, just south of Harbin, China. The Japanese soldiers looked on the Chinese about the same, if not worse, than the Nazis viewed the Jews. The reason we know so much about the death camps is when General Eisenhower discovered what the Nazis had been doing, he told the Army to document everything and show the world. When Unit 731 was discovered, the OSS thought the documents were worth a lot more than the people who died to make them. Humans were used as guinea pigs to find out the effectiveness of chemical and biological weapons. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese and Korean people were killed to find out the best way to kill other people. A plan was in the works to launch hundreds of balloons carrying biological and chemical weapons that would sail across the Pacific Ocean and rain down death and destruction on the United States. Only one balloon ever managed to kill a group of citizens. Everybody involved in the nastiness of Unit 731 was granted immunity in order to get the files and use their information. Shiro Ishii lived out the rest of his days in peace until he died of throat cancer at age 67. Well, the show is called Mysteries from the Past, and a lot of people have never heard of Unit 731. The world didn't want chemical or biological weapons to even exist, let alone be used. The governments, on the other hand, considered these to be necessary devices just in case the other guys had them. The Soviet Union wanted these weapons just in case the United States or Britain had them. The United States and Britain wanted them just in case the Soviets had them. A theory developed as people were looking into the strange deaths on board the Ourang Medan. The war had been over for about 2 years. The Soviets were evil, nasty, horrible people who wanted to kill everyone. China was on its way to becoming a communist state as well. There might have been some things hidden away in what was left of Unit 731 that certain folks in either the United States or elsewhere wanted. And not just the documents, but maybe the actual weapons. There's some evidence that the Ourang Medan was transporting chemical weapons. Those 7,000 boxes of unknown material loaded on board at Shanghai, as well as the 8,000 boxes at a smaller port, might have contained chemical weapons. It is 1,400 miles from Unit 731 in Harbin to Shanghai. It's only a couple hundred miles from Harbin to the coast. Why not take the shorter route? Vladivostok is the closest port city, and it's part of Russia, and at the time it was part of the Soviet Union. The Soviets would have tried to seize any suspicious-looking cargo found on board a cargo ship that looked like it was of questionable registration. In other words, the Ourang Medan. Had this been an illegal shipment, the folks involved wouldn't have wanted to use a shipping company that might not like breaking the law. Seeing as the name of the ship might have been changed after the ship was stolen, it could have been an attractive means of getting illicit cargo from one side of the world to the other. Just because the OSS, which became the CIA in 1947, had granted immunity to General Ishii, it didn't mean they were the ones smuggling chemicals out of China. Germany had been allied to Japan at that time. There could have been some people working for the occupied Nazis who were shipping weapons to Argentina. The Ourang Medan was supposed to meet up with another ship off the coast of Costa Rica and transfer the 15,000 containers to this unnamed vessel. Some chemicals are very unstable. They sit in storage for a while and then simply break down and become inert. Others break down and become corrosive or explosive. Moving a bunch of drums or containers with unknown contents by people who are usually paid as little as possible, things get damaged. Had one drum been dropped or banged hard enough to cause a small leak, it could have escalated into a major leak that simply overwhelmed the entire crew. As the chemicals leaked and mixed with other chemicals, they could have reached the point of ignition or explosion, sinking the ship. Or someone with a vested interest in keeping the contents secret might have triggered the explosion. The SOS was sent out over open radio channels. Anyone with a receiver would have been aware the crew encountered a deadly situation and decided it was time to start covering their tracks. I keep hearing how it's impossible to keep a secret. It really depends on how far you're willing to go to keep a secret. There are two basic ways to keep secrets. One is to not tell anyone who doesn't have a need to know. As long as everyone involved has a vested interest in keeping quiet, the secret should be safe. The other way is to control the narrative. Let parts of the story out. Change all the names and leak it out once more. Change the dates and the locations each time the story is told. Add impossible details that people will be convinced could never happen. Keep adding and subtracting details until the story is so mixed up no one can figure out which parts are believable. Look at the assassination of John Kennedy. There are so many theories as to who did it and how that nobody can point to one story and say, this is what happened. Oswald was the lone gunman, but there were too many shots fired. The police found 2 different rifles on the 6th floor. There were 3 future presidents in Dallas just before the fatal shooting: Johnson, Nixon, and Bush. There are photos of men being questioned by the Dallas police who are all connected to Watergate. It was the Soviets, the Cubans, the Mafia, the oil barons. Maybe it was the Secret Service or even the CIA. The basic story of the ship carrying unknown cargo developing a medical crisis and calling for help is pretty much a given. When, where, or why it happened has become so confusing it may never be straightened out. Only if someone is able to find the Ourang Medan, or whatever the ship was actually named, and discover what's in the hold, will we know for sure. It's a big ocean, and nobody knows where to even start looking. If a company were to go looking for sunken ships, they would probably want to find the Awa Maru. The Awa Maru was a passenger ship that was confiscated by the Japanese Navy to be used to transport cargo and soldiers. It sailed back and forth between Japan and China. On occasion, it would be sent to the Philippines or other islands controlled by the Japanese. In 1945, the Awa Maru was employed as a Red Cross relief ship, supposedly carrying vital supplies to the American and Allied prisoners of war in Japanese custody. Under the Relief for POWs agreement, she was supposed to be given safe passage by Allied forces, and Allied commanders issued orders to that effect. The American prisoners regularly received these relief packages in the POW camps located in Europe. However, those in the Pacific Theater did not, due to the lack of Japanese cooperation. The whole story of POW relief packages has a huge hole in it. Cargo was loaded aboard the ship and transported to Singapore in early March. What kind of cargo? Probably arms and ammunition, since Red Cross packages would not be coming from Japan. The Red Cross shipment was supposedly loaded, consisting mostly of rice and other food to be shipped back to Japan. Several hundred stranded merchant marine officers, military personnel, diplomats, and civilians got on board as well. Late at night, before the ship left port, the men working the docks were removed. Soldiers escorted trucks to the loading hatches on the ship. The rice was removed and replaced by boxes containing 40 tons of gold with a value of $5 billion, that's with a B, dollars. There was also 12 tons of platinum valued at $58 million. Boxes full of diamonds were also seen being carried on board the ship under cover of darkness and heavy security. Because they were loading in Singapore, there were lots of Chinese workers who had absolutely no like nor love for the Japanese military. They would risk life and limb to spy on the Japanese and then let the Allies know what they were doing. The odds of being found were tremendous, and once you were found out, well, your life wasn't worth having. But that didn't stop them from watching what was going on and then telling the Allies. Once the hatches had been secured, the Awa Maru set sail, claiming to be carrying food for the POWs back in Japan. Either someone in the U.S. Navy was gullible, or they knew exactly what was going on. The ship was designated as being non-combatant relief ship and off limits to attack. The ship departed Singapore March 28th. April 1st, it was intercepted late at night in the Taiwan Strait by an American submarine, the USS Queenfish, which mistook her for a destroyer. The torpedoes from the Queenfish sank the ship. Only one of the 2,004 passengers and crew survived. Kentaro Shimada was the captain's personal steward, and it was the third time he was the sole survivor of a ship that was torpedoed. He should be right up there with Violet Jessup and Unsinkable Sam when it comes to surviving sinkings. Either these folks and one cat were very lucky, or somebody's trying to kill them. Violet Jessup was on board the Olympic when it was hit by a British warship. She was also on the Titanic and the Britannic. Both ships sank. The lifeboat she was on after escaping from the Britannic also sank. Sam was one of the few survivors of the Bismarck. He was also on the HMS Cossack and the HMS Ark Royal, both of which sank during World War II. Were they all very lucky, or was somebody out to get them? Maybe they were just bad luck people and cat to be around. The commanding officer of the Queenfish, Commander Charles Elliott Laughlin, was ordered by Admiral Ernest King to an immediate general court-martial. The Awa Maru was carrying a cargo of rubber, tin, lead, and sugar. 1,700 merchant seamen and 80 first-class passengers, who were all survivors of ships that were sunk, who were being transported from Singapore to Japan. There was nothing said about the Red Cross relief packages being sent to the POWs that were never going to get the packages anyway. And Kentaro Shimada said there were no Red Cross supplies on board. They had been unloaded and replaced with unknown cargo. Commander Laughlin was found guilty of negligence, and the U.S. government offered via neutral Switzerland to replace the Awa Maru with a similar ship. Japan demanded full restitution. There's a war on, and these guys are arguing about a ship that got sunk. On the very day of Japan's surrender, August 14, 1945, Foreign Minister Togo forwarded a message to the United States through Bern, Switzerland, demanding payment of $45 million for the loss of 2,003 lives. That's $22,466.30 per person. I wonder how they came up with that amount. Anyway, $7.25 million for the goods on board the Awa Maru, a total of $52.5 million. No gold bullion was mentioned in the message. The United States pretty much told him to pound sand. As for Commander Laughlin, he was found not guilty of culpable inefficiency in the performance of duties and disobeying a lawful order of a superior. He was later promoted to Rear Admiral. I really wonder why his superiors ordered him, "Don't touch that ship." They must have known that the Red Cross supplies were not going to go to POWs, but like I said, maybe they knew what was going on. In 1980, the People's Republic of China launched one of the biggest salvage efforts on a single ship in history. They claimed that they had successfully located and identified the wreck in 1977, and they were convinced that the vessel was carrying billions in gold and jewels. After about 5 years and $100 million spent on the effort, the search was called off. The official story was no treasure was found. I'll believe that when the sun comes up in the west. Why don't I believe a government when they make a statement like this? I wonder. For all I know, the Chinese government might have searched for a sunken Soviet submarine instead. The treasure could still be down there, scattered about the bottom of the sea floor, or it might be hidden away in some communist leader's private personal vault. It's funny how in communism everything belongs to everyone except for those in charge who actually own everything. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show, found it entertaining and informative. My latest book, Paranormal Stories, is out at Amazon.com. UFOs, ghosts, cryptids, and a few stories that just didn't fit into those categories. You can get it in paperback, Kindle, or hardcover if you're looking for a gift for someone. If you did enjoy the show, let everybody know what they're missing. Tell them to tune in, and maybe they'll enjoy the show too. Like Tony Merkel says, share the show. He doesn't care how you share it, just share it. He also has a nice little saying, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. I kept thinking maybe I should have my own tagline like that, and I came up with something my dad used to always say. If all the problems in the world were hung on a tree, we would all pick our own. Anytime life seems to hand me just a little too much to handle, I'll just look around and I'll find somebody whose life I have absolutely no want, wish, need, nor to desire to switch with, and it makes me feel better. Maybe that's a little self-serving, but, well, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?